Chapter 1.2 Form, Volume, Mass, and Texture. What are these terms? Are they elements or principles of art? They are elements, the building blocks that lead to the development of the principles of art. In particular, these elements, form, volume, mass, and texture, have to do with three-dimensional objects with mass that exist in space. Okay, these three terms, they are different and yet easily confusable. Let's distinguish them from each other. Form. Form comes first because in a way you can think of it as the primary term. Form is any object that can be defined in three dimensions, meaning it has a height, a width, and a depth. Those are its three dimensions. And you can see on the screen that there is a hollow cube and a solid pyramid. Those are both forms. Now how are those forms different? We use the terms volume and mass to describe the differences, because the hollow cube and the solid pyramid have very different mass to volume ratios. Volume is the space filled or enclosed by a three-dimensional figure or object. Both the hollow cube and the solid pyramid have volume. They take up space. Now mass is a volume that has or gives the illusion of having weight, density, and bulk. So which one of these two objects has more mass? Hopefully you can correctly identify the solid pyramid as having more visual mass because of its apparent solidity, and then the hollow cube is seen to have more volume and less mass because it is depicted as hollow, empty of material. The Sphinx and the pyramids of Egypt are a good example of forms with a strong mass and volume. When we look at stone, intuitively we know it's heavy, dense, and has a lot of mass. Remember, in art these terms, mass and volume, are more of aesthetic descriptors than mathematically quantifiable actualities. We aren't going to measure the mass to volume ratio of anything in this class. We are just going to use these terms to describe how artworks look and feel. Not all objects express equal amounts of volume and mass. Some artworks have a lot more volume and less mass, meaning there is a lot of space in them. Ghost Rider on the bottom right has a large volume. It takes up a lot of space. It encompasses multiple floors of that library's lobby, yet it is made of tiny cast parts and thin steel cables, so it doesn't have a lot of mass compared to as much volume as it fills. There are two types of forms, just like there are two types of shapes in two-dimensional images. There are two types of forms in three-dimensional objects, geometric and organic. David Smith's cubi is considered geometric because it is composed of cubes, rectangular cubes, and a cylinder-like form. Nothing in it that would be created in the wilds of nature. Lino Pagliapietra's Batman, on the other hand, is strongly organic because it has no straight lines or flat surfaces. Even its surface texture can be described as mottled or pot-marked, the way some seeds or weathered surfaces form. It also dynamically undulates in width between thick and thin parts, all qualities typically ascribed to organic forms. This little sculpture from the Middle Ages is lovely, and it's so old we don't know the artist who made it. It's sincere and horrific at the same time. Let's break this form down. We've got the human body. That's an organic form. Bodies are organic forms, and many types of bodies have symmetry, meaning it has a mirrored appearance down a central axis. And we associate beauty with symmetry. We just naturally do. That's another instinct. In the Rodin Pieta, Christ's body is contorted, and its symmetry is denied to the viewer. We read his body as uncomfortable, and we instinctively know the form is distressed. We visually share in that distress. Organic forms empathetically communicate much about human experience. Let's put these two forms together and contrast them. What is their main difference? They are both organic, yet they are very different in subject matter. Remember the three categories of subject matter? Representational, abstract, and non-objective? The Rodin Pieta is a representational form. In Batman, we don't recognize the shape of the sculpture as anything we've seen in our world, so it's non-objective, meaning it doesn't look like a recognizable object. Relief sculpture. This is a term for three-dimensional art that is often attached to a wall. It has three dimensions, but the depth is much more shallow than the width and height. Also, reliefs are intended to be viewed from one direction. In this Roman relief, there is a foreground and a background. How did the artist distinguish those two spaces? The foreground is the space closest to the viewer, the figures for which we can see their whole bodies. They are carved in high relief, meaning they have more depth than the floating heads behind them. Those floating heads are carved less deeply and are in the background. In the round, or freestanding sculpture is in many ways the opposite of relief sculpture. In the round, sculpture is designed to be seen and appreciated from all sides. Therefore, its depth is considered as much as its width and height. All three dimensions are fully accounted for. In the round, sculptures tend to be more dynamic and lifelike than the relief sculptures attached to a wall. Let's go back to Ghost Rider. We already know it has more volume and less mass than many other sculptures. Thus, it is a good example to illustrate the term open volume, meaning the better part of the space contained within the form is just empty space. In an open volume, the artist is implying a form by using separate pieces to make it. This is a very similar concept to implied line in drawing, where there is not an actual singular line, just a series of marks on a page. Here in Ghost Rider, there is no singular object, just a series of small objects hanging in space suspended by cables. Negative space is similar to open volume, but different in that the central space of a work may have some mass in the middle, just spread out so that there is also space around the parts that fill the middle. That space in and around objects or parts of objects is called negative space. Here in this work titled In the Blue, it's about the experience of being immersed in water, and I think visually it does that. The negative space and the light filtering through those loose constructions create the visual effects of light underwater. I so enjoy this sculpture. Rachel Whiteread is British. She made this sculpture in London in 1993. That same year she won the Turner Prize for Art. That's one of Britain's top art awards. It's as if the MoMA or the Met in New York gives you an award. She made this sculpture out of a condemned housing project by pouring concrete into one of the units of the building before it got demolished. That's pretty brilliant. Whiteread's house is a good example of a sculpture with a strong, heavy mass. This transition in form between these two artists illustrates the shift from representational to abstract forms, because it's the art capital of the Western world and Auguste Rodin on the left. They knew each other at all the forms and images and artworks that have come before us, which are mostly representational. Sculptures have the same title, to put his spin on sculpture. It was a known, semi-popular, how he came up with this theme in art. You know, it's more Auguste Rodin on the left, more in the shape of the elder. He's French. He lives in Paris. And he carves out two figures in the representational style as cartoon. He wants us to recognize those bodies as Brancusi tells everyone it's about the unity and oneness of being in love, how two become one. I also see humor in his work. I think he was punking Rodin a little bit because Rodin so seriously and laboriously worked on his sculpture. Brancusi didn't have to work as hard to carve his stone sculpture. His forms are very shallowly carved and stay near the surface, not going deeply in. Because Brancusi does not try accurately to depict human anatomy, his sculpture is abstract. This transition in preferences from representation to abstraction was happening as a collective movement in Europe from the late 1800s into the mid-1900s. Form can be architectural. The architect Frank Gehry is well known specifically for organic forms, which are unique in architecture. Most buildings are geometric. Organic architecture is much more complicated to engineer and construct. For this museum in Spain, he was inspired by the city of Bilbao's tradition of shipbuilding. Gehry used aerospace design computer programs to design this building. The sculpture Maman by Louise Bourgeois works very well in contrast to the museum. Her spider works well here because it has a large volume compared to its mass. The central section is an open volume, and it looks good beside the solid mass and volume of the museum. Texture, an element of art. It's superficial, meaning it's about the surface quality of a work, the way the surface of a form looks and feels. Have you seen the movie The Sixth Sense? This scene was pretty popular when it was released back in 1999. The actors didn't actually say they see textures everywhere, but if you look, you will see textures everywhere. Textures vary widely and can be described by many adjectives, such as shiny, soft, or mottled. Texture relates to the tactile qualities and the ways that light reflects off a surface. One of Anish Kapoor's most famous works is Cloudgate, located in Chicago. In, or I should say on, Kapoor's Cloudgate, the texture is very simple, polished steel, and that reflects all the light hitting its surface. That works for viewers because humans still like shiny things. Texture is often defined by the visible materials of a form. While shiny is often a safe bet, not all textures are such. This term, subversive texture, subverts previous tactile experiences by utilizing surface materials in unexpected and unfamiliar ways. Thus we have a cup, saucer, and spoon, all recognizable forms, yet covered in fur which most humans have a natural aversion to putting towards their lips. So our mind is challenged because the form is visually recognizable, yet the mentally associated tactility of fur is not. Most of us would have a hard time imagining utilizing these objects for their intended purpose. We are thrown out of our usually comfortable relationship to them and into a bizarre situation where we are not certain what to do. This was a not uncommon surrealist concept, challenging the viewer to focus on exploring their unconscious mind and not take sense perceptions for granted. Alright, the end. Here are the picture credits. Message me with any comments or questions. Good luck on the quiz.